Title: He laughed at the old man's metal until the room went silent. You ever witness a moment so uncomfortable, so bone-deep wrong, that your whole body feels it, like your skin knows something's about to happen before your brain catches up? That's how it started. A room full of people, a young man with too much confidence, and an old man sitting quietly in the corner with a metal pinned to his chest. 1 second, people were chuckling along with the guy making fun of the useless old relic. And the next, the entire room froze. No one told him to stop. No one had to, because when the truth about that metal came out, no one laughed again. And if you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. This isn't about a veteran getting his respect back. This is about something much deeper, something hidden, something people in power tried to erase. And you're about to hear it. You clicked this video because the title pulled you in, but what you're going to get is bigger than that. By the time we're done here, you'll be questioning what you thought you knew about history, silence, and what kind of man really wears a medal like that. Let me talk to you for a second, yeah? Not the viewer number, not the audience. You, the one watching this right now on your phone or TV, or maybe just listening in the background. You're not here by accident. Maybe part of you feels like there's more to the world than what people show. Maybe you're one of those people who can pick up on the smallest shifts in energy, the way a room feels just before something breaks. This story is going to hit you harder than most, because it's not just about what happened that day. It's about why it happened, why certain stories get buried, why people laugh at what they don't understand, and why sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the quiet ones, the ones who've already survived what would destroy most. That's who this old man was, and you're going to find out why that scared everyone into silence. So stay, don't skip, don't bounce, not because I said so, but because I'm giving you something most videos won't: the real story. Clickbait, no stretched out intro, no generic nonsense. You're going to walk away from this knowing exactly what happened in that room, who that man really was, and what it means for you. But to do that, you've got to stay with me all the way, because the moment everything turned, the moment everyone in that room stopped breathing, it's not even the craziest part. That comes later, and you'll miss it if you check out early. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't just want to be entertained, but wants to understand what other people miss, then you're exactly who I made this for. And I promise you won't forget this. It happened in a small town you probably haven't heard of unless you've driven through backroads with no cell signal. The kind of place where time slows down and everyone acts like they know everyone else's secrets. A place where the grocery store still has handwritten signs, where the diner hasn't changed its menu since the 70s, and where folks greet you with a nod that says more than their words ever will. It was Veterans Day. They held a little community celebration in the town hall. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, a few flags, one guy on an old mic trying not to stutter through names. The kind of thing most people go to out of politeness, not passion. But this time, someone new showed up. He looked like he'd come straight out of a fitness influencer's Instagram page, young built, sunglasses hanging off his collar. That cocky smile that tries too hard to act casual. He wasn't from the town. Some said he was visiting his uncle. Others said he was just passing through. But what everyone remembers is what he did. The moment the old man was called up to receive a small town-issued honor, a token. Really, nothing fancy. The young guy smirked. At first, people ignored it, but then he muttered something just loud enough. Something about the medal looking like something out of a cereal box. Something about the old man being too ancient to even remember what war he fought in. When the air shifted, not all at once, but slowly, like a cold wind leaking through a crack in the wall, people turned their heads. A couple of the older folks stiffened. A child even stopped playing with his toy car. The kind of silence that has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with recognition. You ever see someone disrespect something they don't understand, and the universe itself seems to respond? That's what this was. Not anger, not outrage, just ... pause. As if something ancient had stirred, awakened by that laugh. Because the thing is, that medal, it wasn't from a regular war, it wasn't even from a battle listed in most history books, and the man wearing it, he wasn't just a soldier, he was a witness to something that officially never happened, something the government buried. So deep, even FOIA requests get denied. And he never said a word about it. Until that day, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back a little. Let me tell you about the man with the medal. He lived alone in a modest house just off the main road. White porch, a single rocking chair, and an American flag so faded it looked almost pink. Most people in the town knew of him, but no one really knew him. He didn't go to church, didn't talk much, bought the same groceries every Friday. The rumors around him were strange. Some said he used to be CIA, others swore he worked at some top-secret military base in Nevada, and then there were the more ... absurd stories. About how his shadow didn't always move when he did. About how some kids swore his eyes glowed when headlights hit them at night. Small town legends, right? People make stuff up, except ... sometimes they don't. You ever feel like you're brushing up against a truth that's been hidden from you your whole life? Like something happened in this country that no one wants to talk about, and the ones who do remember it aren't allowed to speak. That's what this feels like. That man's silence wasn't just from age or trauma, it was trained. There's a difference. And when someone trained to say nothing suddenly decides to speak, you listen. But the moment he finally opened his mouth, you could feel it across the whole room. Not a speech, not a rant, just ... a sentence, a name. And when he said it, one of the town officials dropped the microphone. I know you're wondering, what name did he say? Hold on, we'll get there. But before we do, you need to understand what kind of man this really was. You need to know why this young guy's laugh didn't just offend a room, it triggered a memory buried so deep, it took 30 years and the wrong laugh at the wrong time to bring it to the surface. And once it did, it didn't stop with that room. Because by the time the night was over, the young guy was gone, vanished. No one saw him leave. His rental car was still in the lot. His phone left behind. And yet no one reported him missing, at least, not officially. I want to warn you, what comes next isn't easy to hear, but it's important. Especially now. Especially with everything happening in the world. The past isn't as buried as people think. Sometimes it's just hiding, waiting for the wrong laugh to wake it up, and that's exactly what happened here. Still with me? Good, because the real story begins the moment the old man sat back down, eyes glazed over, hands shaken, and someone in the back row stood up and said, he wasn't supposed to say that name. End of introduction. Stay tuned for part 2. The room didn't go back to normal, not even after the old man went quiet again, not after the awkward applause, not after the mayor cracked a forced joke and tried to move on to the next part of the ceremony. Everyone was pretending that they didn't hear what they just heard, pretending they weren't shaken, pretending they didn't just feel something crawl up their spine. But you can't unfeel it. You can't unhear a name like that. And the weirdest part, no one repeated it, not out loud. Not even later when the chatter started back up outside. It was like people were scared to say it twice, like it was something heavy and radioactive. And saying it again might make it real. That's what made it worse. Not just what was said, but the way the people who should have been confused weren't. For most of his life, the man with the medal kept to himself. No family visited, no birthday parties, no BBQs, no one dropping by with casseroles during holidays. Just silence, routine. And his morning walks always at 5:17 a.m. sharp, not 5:15, not 5:30, 5:17. You ask anyone on the east side of town and they'll tell you. Same path, same limp, same look in his eyes, like he was scanning for something no one else could see. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was surveillance. Old instincts never die, right? Nobody thought too hard about it, not until that night in the town hall. Not until folks started realizing things about him that never made sense in the first place, like how he always paid in cash, how he had zero digital footprint, how there wasn't a single photograph of him younger than 70. People thought he was just eccentric. But after that night, the word they used shifted off the grid. And once you hear that word in a town this small, it spreads like wildfire, especially when disappearances follow. You remember the young guy, the one who laughed. Here's the part no one's been able to explain. That same night, around 11:30 p.m., someone reported strange noises near the old train tracks, just outside town. Something loud, mechanical. Some said it sounded like a low hum. Others swore it was like metal scraping on metal, only deeper, like it was underground. Police showed up, found nothing. But by morning, the car the young man had rented was still in the parking lot, unlocked, keys still in the ignition. No fingerprints, no trace, just gone. The guy hadn't checked out of his motel. His things were still in the room. And yet, no one filed a report. Not the motel owner, not the family he claimed to be visiting. Nothing, as if no one wanted to admit he was ever there. That's when it started unraveling. Because people started asking questions, not about the old man, but about who else might have known something. About who reacted a little too quickly when the name was spoken. About how the mayor looked like he'd seen a ghost. About how the fire chief, a man known for being calm during literal explosions, dropped his coffee when the name was said. It's like they all knew, or at least, had heard something. And when the old man said it out loud, they didn't just hear it, they remembered it. That's the part no one talks about. That look of recognition. Because you don't react like that to nonsense. You don't go pale over something that means nothing. Which means it wasn't just the name. It was the memory tied to it now. Here's where it gets muddy. A few folks in town, people you wouldn't expect to be in the loop, started acting strange. The librarian, a quiet woman in her 60s who always remembered your name and late fees down to the penny, suddenly took 2 weeks off and wouldn't tell anyone why. The local vet, former army himself, closed shop without notice and boarded up his windows, even though he still lived upstairs. The hardware store owner, who hadn't missed a day of work in 11 years, started sleeping in the back room with a shotgun propped against the door. All within days of the ceremony. Like they knew something was coming. like they'd been through this once before. Some people blamed it on the old man's past. They said maybe he had a breakdown, maybe he was finally letting dementia get the better of him. But those people weren't in the room. They didn't see how still everything got when the name dropped. They didn't see the young guy's smirk vanish like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. You don't smirk 1 second and look like you've seen death the next unless something hits you so hard it cuts through every layer of your front. That's what this was. Not performance, not confusion, pure fear. The kind that doesn't come from a name but from recognizing it. The deeper people looked, the more things started surfacing. Newspaper clippings, half-ripped and misdated. A photo from 1983 that showed a young man standing in the background of a military debrief, blurry, hard to tell, but those who knew the old man swore it was him, except the badge on his uniform didn't match anything from the U.S. Army, Navy, or Air Force. It had a triangle with no base, no stars, no stripes, just an open top and a black center. And here's the kicker: every version of that photo found online or in town archives was corrupted or missing that specific corner. Except for one kept in a scrapbook by a Naudist schoolteacher who used to work in D.C. She told her daughter before she died that there were operations the public would never be allowed to know about. Not because of secrecy, but because of memory failure by design. That's how she worded it. Now ask yourself, how does a whole room go silent over a name no one's supposed to know? How does a young man vanish into thin air without a trace, and no one even asks about it? How does a medal with no national registration or known design end up on an old man's chest stand somehow? Local officials don't question it. These aren't loose ends, they're buried threads. And the more you tug, the more you realize something's been stitched right under the surface of this town. Something coordinated. But here's where it gets weird, and, I mean really weird. 3 days after the event, a blackout hit just the east side of town. Not a storm, not an outage, just that one section. No phone signals, no Wi-Fi. Total dead zone. And then at exactly 2:47 a.m. 3 power company trucks rolled in. Unmarked. No logos. No plates, no one saw the workers. But by morning, everything was back to normal. The only problem? That section of town, it's the one the old man lived in. Look, I know how it sounds. I know by now you're either thinking, this can't be real, or your mind's racing because it feels too real. And that's the line we're walking right now. But I'm telling you, this whatever happened in that town isn't isolated. People have seen medals like that before. People have heard names whispered and then forgotten them moments later. People have tried to dig into certain declassified files only to find those files reclassified days later. And the old man, he wasn't just some forgotten veteran, he was part of something meant to be erased, something bigger than that town, bigger than any one person. And the one thing he never planned on was breaking silence. But he did. And now it's not just the town that's listening, it's them. Who they are is where we're headed next, and you're not going to believe who's at the center of it. It started with a journal. Nothing fancy. Just a weathered notebook with yellowed pages, a cracked leather cover, and faint water damage at the corners like it had been hidden somewhere damp for years. No name on the front, just a simple black ink, barely visible unless you tilted it under light, a triangle with no base. The same one from that strange, blurry military photo. A local high schooler found it by accident while cutting through the wooded trail behind the old man's house. Thought it was just some random diary until he flipped it open and saw pages written in code. Symbols, numbers, phrases, out of order. He brought it to the sheriff's office, handed it over without a second thought, expecting some thanks, maybe even a reward. But 2 hours later, that kid was back at home, and a man in a gray suit was on his porch pretending to be with the Department of Energy. No ID badge, no explanation. Just a request to never mention the notebook again. The kid's parents thought it was weird, but they didn't want trouble. Small towns have a way of teaching you to mind your business when things don't feel right. Now, here's the twist. By the time anyone asked about the journal again, it was gone. Sheriff claimed he never received it. No entry in the evidence log. No mention in any report. The security camera facing the front desk had a 2-hour gap, right during the time it would have come in. Just static. No footage. When the high schooler tried to follow up, the sheriff denied ever seeing him that day, said he was out on patrol, nowhere near the station. But a gas station clerk across the street swore he saw the sheriff standing outside the office around noon, smoking a cigarette, and talking to someone in an unmarked van. No one's seen that van since. That's when people started getting nervous again. Not just because of what vanished, but because of what didn't make sense. Why cover up a notebook? Why pretend it never existed unless what was inside was more than just personal thoughts? Whatever it was, someone didn't want it circulating. And if that wasn't enough to raise eyebrows, the librarian, the same one who took 2 weeks off right after the town hall event, came back. Different, not just tired, not just quiet, changed. She returned with bandages on her wrists and a twitch in her voice she never had before. When asked about her absence, all she said was, "Sometimes it's better not to remember." Then she handed someone a burned CD with no label and told them to keep it safe but never play it unless something else disappears. The next morning, her house was empty. Lights still on, door unlocked. No one's seen her since. Local police say she must have left town, but her purse, her clothes, her corral, still there. You tell me how that makes sense. As more layers peeled back, the town's trust started to fracture. People turned inward. Conversations got shorter. Neighbors who used to wave across the street now pretended they didn't see each other. And in the middle of it all, the old man didn't say another word. He sat on his porch each morning, same time, same motionless stare, like he was watching something no one else could. Until one day, someone approached him, a man no one had seen before. Tall, sunburnt, mid-50s, maybe, wearing a trucker cap with no brand and boots so worn they looked older than the town itself. He sat down without asking, and the two of them didn't speak. Not for minutes, not for an hour, just silence. The next day, the old man's rocking chair was empty. People assumed he went inside, but when the mail started piling up and the paper sat untouched for 3 straight days, someone finally went to check. He was gone, house locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry, no body, just the triangle symbol carved deep into the back of the rocking chair. That's when whispers turned into real fear, because the truth wasn't just hiding, it was pushing back. Every time someone got close, something got erased. Every path toward answers seemed to collapse just before it could be followed. And now, there was a growing sense that maybe the biggest threat wasn't the mystery itself, but the people pretending it didn't exist. The mayor stopped answering calls. The fire chief took early retirement and moved out of state overnight. And those who tried to piece things together, those still asking questions, they started finding their phones glitching, their internet going down at the exact moment they tried to search certain names or keywords. It wasn't random. It was precise, coordinated, just like everything else. Then came the betrayal, and this one hit harder than all the rest. Because it came from someone the town trusted. The mechanic, a Vietnam vet who'd been fixing cars in town for over 30 years, quietly slipped a tip to someone asking questions, told them to come by his garage at midnight, said he had something to show them, something the old man had left behind before he disappeared. He said it wasn't much, but it was enough to open the next door, enough to prove something bigger was at play. So they showed up, midnight sharp. But the garage was already open, lights on, no sign of the mechanic, just his toolbox, tipped over, a single wrench lying out of place, and underneath, an envelope, inside, a photo, black and white. 2 men standing on a desert tarmac. One of them, unmistakably, the old man, much younger. The other, blurred. Intentionally blurred, like the film had been tampered with. And on the back, written in red marker, "You were never supposed to see this." That's when everything shifted, because someone had been watching not just the town, but anyone trying to piece the story together. Someone always a step ahead, erasing, distracting, rerouting. Every lead suddenly felt dangerous. Every ally became a maybe. People once helpful started acting distant. Some even turned hostile, warning others to stop digging, to let it go. And as one last attempt was made to find the mechanic and press forward, a strange discovery was made behind his shoppan, old storm cellar with no recorded entry, no history, no blueprint. Inside, concrete walls covered in newspaper clippings about events that never happened, names that don't appear in databases, and blacked out files with one thing in common, the triangle symbol. But before more could be uncovered, something happened. The power went out, not just in the garage, not just in the street, the entire town, and in the pitch black. Someone whispered a name no one had said out loud since that first night. Not the same one, the old man said, a different one, and whoever said it was standing too close. But when the lights flicked back on, there was no one there. Across the county line, nearly 50 miles from that storm cellar and the blackout that swallowed the town whole, a woman named Lorraine Whitlow was flipping through an old photo album she hadn't opened in years. Lorraine wasn't just some forgotten relative, she was the old man's sister, though no one in town knew that. They'd assumed he had no family, no next of kin, no one left who would bother with funeral arrangements if the time ever came. That was by design. Lorraine lived in the outskirts of a quiet, wind-swept patch of land that most people only drove through to get to somewhere else. A retired radio technician, she kept her home radio-free, cell phone off, and no computers in sight. After a career, with deep clearance, at a defunct Air Force station in New Mexico, she'd learned the hard way what it meant when people started disappearing without headlines. She thought she'd buried that part of her life until 2 days ago, when a letter arrived, no return address, just her name, in block print. Inside was a Polaroid, her brother, standing next to a sign that read, "Authorized personnel only, entry will be monitored." Behind him, a door she hadn't seen in 40 years, a door she swore had been sealed shut by executive order. And written on the back of the photo, in the same red ink they used in internal classified debriefs, he spoke. "Now they know. You're next." Lorraine didn't panic. Not on the surface. She'd been trained not to. But her hands shook when she made tea that night. Her dog growled at the back door for hours. And when she finally went to sleep, she locked every window, drew every curtain, and placed a recorder under her bed, one of those old analog cassette ones. The kind that doesn't run on Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. The kind that doesn't crash when you speak a name that shouldn't exist. When she played the tape back the next morning, expecting just silence or maybe ambient hum, what she heard instead was a voicelow.com, unrecognizable. It said one sentence. "He broke protocol, and so did you." That's when she realized she wasn't just a bystander anymore. Someone or something had linked her back into the chain, and she had no idea how deep that chain now ran. Back in town, the power returned like nothing ever happened. No surges, no damage, just a clean reboot. Except now, people noticed small differences: digital clocks blinking out of sync, smart thermostats resetting, security cameras showing footage that seemed off by a few seconds. And then there was the strange static heard on every local radio station. Exactly at 3:03 a.m., just 15 seconds of it, followed by what sounded like a coded transmission. Eco 7 confirmed. Silence, breached, realigned nodes. The sheriff claimed it was just a freak signal bounce, but others remembered something similar from decades ago, back when underground testing facilities would accidentally bleed into civilian airwaves. Wasn't a coincidence, it was That same day, a teacher at the local elementary school reported something strange. During a class art project, a second-grade student drew a symbol same triangle with no base. When asked where he saw it, the boy said, "The man in the window." Showed me his parents, alarmed, claimed no such man existed. Their home, which faced a wooded stretch with no neighbors for a mile, had no reported visitors. But later that night, a trail of small handprints was found on the fogged glass. High, for a child, too small for a grown man, and every one of them pointed toward the inside of the house. As more strange incidents stacked up, the original story began to fracture. People who once believed the old man had accidentally spoken the truth now questioned if he'd even been in control when he said the name. What if he wasn't breaking silence? What if he was being used? Worse yet, what if the name wasn't a warning, but an invitation? That's what started to haunt those who remembered the moment he said it, that maybe the silence wasn't fear. Maybe it was recognition, and maybe by reacting, they'd answered something, given it permission. Then came the final blow to what little clarity remained. A thumb drive showed up at the town's newspaper office, slid under the locked front door. During a storm, no name, no message. Just an 8 gigabytes drive with a single video file. The editor, a skeptical woman named Rena with a background in investigative journalism, took it home and loaded it onto a laptop unconnected to the internet. In case, what played was less than 3 minutes long. Shaky footage of what looked like an underground room. No timestamp, no location. Two people in military uniforms stood frozen, while something unseen flickered behind the camera lens. Not a person. Not quite a shape. Just a movement that didn't match anything natural. Then, a phrase spoken in a cold, robotic tone. Subject: Alpha has initiated breach protocol. Realignment must occur before phase reset. And just as the video ended, the image froze on a blurry still of someone stepping into frames, someone that looked exactly like the young man who had vanished. After laughing at the old man's metal, it didn't make sense. He was gone, disappeared, and yet, there he was standing in a space no one could identify, wearing clothing that looked decades out of date, facing the camera like he knew it was watching. But the worst part, the thing no one could explain, was his eyes, glowing faintly, unblinking, and just before the screen cut to black, he mouthed something. Frame by frame, Rena slowed it down. It took hours, but the words were clear. Tell Lorraine it wasn't an accident. Now every theory collapsed in on itself. Because this wasn't just about the old man, or the town, or some long-buried military op. This was wider, older, and someone or something was using their memories, their fears, even their silence, as a key. No one knew what came next. But one thing was now certain. Not everyone had been telling the truth, and some of them hadn't been human for a long time. Asked ChatGPT. Lorraine hadn't slept in 48 hours. Not really. She closed her eyes for minutes at a time, jolting awake at the slightest creak in the walls or shift in wind. Every instinct, she thought, had rusted away with age, was now awake, vibrating through her bones, like someone had flipped a switch. She hadn't left her house since the Polaroid arrived, not out of fear, exactly, but because something told her that moving might trigger something she couldn't undo. Her phone remained powered off in a drawer, the landline unplugged. She used an old ham radio to monitor strange frequencies. And for the last few nights, there'd been bursts of static followed by distorted number sequences that didn't match any known military encryption. And each night, they grew more urgent. Shorter bursts, louder distortions, as if someone or something was trying to get through. But it wasn't until 3:33 a.m. on the third night that she realized how wrong things had gone. Because that's when the static finally stopped and silence filled the air. Not regular silence, not peace, the absence of all signal. No birds outside, no wind through the windows, not even the low hum of appliances. The kind of silence that feels designed. She sat up, heart pounding. Her dog, usually curled at her feet, wasn't there. She called for him softly. Nothing. When she stepped into the hallway, the air felt colder, naturally still, like a vacuum had been pulled over the house. Every light she turned on flickered, some staying dim, others flashing once before going black. When she opened the back door to check the yard, the motion light didn't trigger, but the grass was flattened in a wide arc, as if something massive had stood there and then disappeared. That was the moment the fear shifted. It wasn't just that she was being watched. She was being surveyed, like an old piece of hardware. Someone wanted to check for corrosion, and where she wasn't alone in the house anymore. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She backed into the kitchen and grabbed the old revolver her brother had left her years ago. Not that it would matter. She wasn't sure bullets could help now, but gripping it made her feel human. Grounded, she walked slowly toward the back room where she kept the notebooks, the shortwave tapes, and the letter from that Air Force general who'd vanished in '87 right after a televised hearing was canceled without explanation. But when she pushed open the door, every page, every tape, every trace of that evidence was gone, replaced with clean, blank pages. The drawers, once packed with classified documents, now held nothing but dust. Her walls, once lined with pins and maps and red string, were stripped bare, and taped to the center of the desk was a single sheet of paper typed, center-lined, 7 words. You don't remember giving them permission. Her knees buckled, because that was the phrase, the exact phrase used in those deep black clearance briefings decades ago when agents were told they'd been coached to forget certain operations. It was the government's quiet way of saying, you signed something you'll never be shown again, and we've taken care of the rest. Only now, it wasn't a protocol, it was a threat. A reminder that someone, or something, had reached into her past, her mind, and pulled pieces loose. Across town, Rena, processing the footage of the young man, had her own moment of clarity, and it wasn't gentle. That night, after locking every window and checking her apartment for bugs, she got a ping on her old laptop, the one not connected to the internet. A file appeared on her desktop, no upload, no Bluetooth, no external drive, just a flicker, and there it was, explain_yourself.wav. She hesitated but pressed play. It wasn't a voice, not one she recognized. It sounded like hers but distorted, layered with static and something darker beneath it, like echoes of screams slowed down. And it repeated just one sentence. You let them in. You opened the door. You asked us to come. She unplugged the laptop. Didn't help. The audio kept playing until she slammed the thing shut and threw it in the freezer. One of the few tricks she remembered from a hacker source years ago. She called her editor, but the number was no longer in service. Tried her backup line, same result. Within minutes, her building's fire alarm went off, but there was no smoke, no fire, no emergency, just a shrill sound that forced everyone outside. When she returned, her place was untouched. Text-to-video file, gone. The USB drive melted into the wood of her desk, as if it had never been physical to begin with. Back in Loren's house, morning came, but the sun never quite broke through. The sky stayed murky, a gray she couldn't remember seeing before. Her dog returned, but wouldn't come inside. He paced the porch, whining and scratching at the windows, like he didn't recognize. The knock on Lorene's door came just after dusk. 3 steady taps. Quiet, but deliberate. The kind that didn't belong to a neighbor or a delivery driver. She stood in the kitchen, frozen in place, the old revolver still within reach on the counter. Her dog didn't bark this time. He just backed away from the door, tail tucked, ears down, a low whimper escaping his throat, like something primal inside him knew better than to confront whatever was on the other side. Lorene didn't move right away. Her pulse was hammering in her ears, and her mind was trying to calculate whether this was just another test or the endgame finally showing up. When she opened the door, nothing was there at first. Just a dim wash of twilight and the faint rustle of dry leaves across the steps. But then she looked down and saw a package. Plain, no markings, no tape, no label, just a black envelope taped to the top. Inside it, a single message in typewritten font. You were right not to trust the code. She brought the package inside, heart thudding so loud she could feel it in her teeth. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either, just the kind of weight that suggested something dense, metallic, or worse, alive. When she opened it, the world tilted sideways. Inside was a set of her own journals, ones she hadn't seen in decades. The early field notebooks from her first years of classified training, which she had been told were seized and destroyed after a containment breach during her final debrief. But here, they were, pages preserved, untouched. And in the margin of one of the entries, a new note had been added in unfamiliar handwriting. We never erased your memory. You did that yourself. You just don't remember why. Her throat dried instantly, because that confirmed something far more terrifying than any external threat. It meant she wasn't just a witness. She had been in on it. She flipped rapidly through the pages, looking for anything that might explain how or why she would have consented to such a thing. That's when she saw an entry she didn't remember writing, from a date that didn't make sense. August 8, 1994. The day she was supposed to be in surgery recovering from an accident in Germany. But here, in her own handwriting, was a detailed account of a meeting deep underground with a group called Eco7. Not a task force, not a project team, something else, something observing. The entry ended with one chilling line. The activation phrase is not to be spoken aloud, and once the breach begins, all known truths must be treated as fiction for public safety. That's when it clicked, the name the old man said in the town hall, the thing that silenced the room. It wasn't a name, it was a trigger, a scripted activation. Phrase buried inside everyone present and planted through methods Lorene now realized were more psychological than chemical. Repetition, visual imprinting, sonic patterns, stuff they'd all dismissed as harmless parts of their training. But it had been intentional, a mechanism, one designed to flip a switch inside a select group of people, who'd all been unknowingly part of something called the memory fold, a decades-old psychological operation built around planting false identities and truths, then hiding those identities inside memory gaps so deep they felt natural. The goal wasn't to erase what happened, it was to embed something else in its place, an entire alternate version of reality. But here's where everything turned. Lorene wasn't the only one who received a package that night. Rena did too. Only hers didn't contain documents, it contained a cassette tape, unmarked, and when she played it on a borrowed recorder from the high school AV room, one of the few players that could still run analog without corrupting it wasn't a message from Lorene or her brother. It was a conversation between herself and someone who sounded like the missing young man only. In this recording, she wasn't the journalist, she was part of the operation, she was giving the briefing. Primary subject will be seeded into town via public disruption. Metal is coded, metal is key. Social ridicule will trigger activation. Witnesses will normalize trauma response. Subject alpha will proceed to trigger mass fold alignment. Herownvoice.com, precise cold. And that's when the real horror set in. Rena wasn't documenting a mystery. She was the mystery. Her role as the town's recorder of events wasn't coincidence, it was covered. Everything she thought she had uncovered was part of a feedback loop, a narrative trap. She'd been reading clues she helped create, stumbling through a path she had once laid herself. And the missing young man, he wasn't a victim either, he was a reset mechanism. Every time the story reached the verge of being exposed, he was sent in to trigger ridicule, initiate the breach, and vanish. His role was never to return, only to restart the pattern. That explained why he appeared in multiple photos across multiple decades. Unaged. Unchanged. Reinserted. Each time to keep the cycle going. Lorene had been right about the breach, but she was wrong about who started it, because this wasn't just a cover-up. This wasn't about buried secrets or missing people or ghost medals. This was about the story itself, the way it was constructed, passed on, edited, and believed. Someone, somewhere, had found a way to use narrative as a weapon, embedding false memories inside real people. turning history into a sandbox of controlled disruption, wiping and reshaping collective memory through trauma, silence, and repetition. And Lorraine, she was no longer trying to stop the breach. She was realizing. She helped design it, but the worst part, she still didn't remember why. Lorraine sat on the edge of the motel bed, the TV static humming in the background, casting soft white flickers across the dark room. Her hands were trembling again, not from fear, but from knowing. She had spread the journals across the blanket, each page, now a puzzle piece soaked in half-truths and coded memories, none of which could be trusted. The cassette was still playing. In the corner, Rena's recorded voice, whispering orders she didn't remember giving. And outside, in the parking lot, a familiar truck sat idling, the same one driven by Theo, her oldest friend, someone she once trusted with her life. Only now, she wasn't sure who he really was. He'd called 2 hours earlier, voice tight, barely masking the urgency. "We need to talk, but not on the phone. Meet me somewhere no one knows about." That was his mistake. Because Lorraine knew Theo didn't talk that way. He always pushed to meet in plain sight. Parks, diners, places with people. That call wasn't a reunion, it was a setup. But she went anyway. He stood under the flickering neon light of the gas station sign, hands in his jacket pockets, face pale but focused. When she approached, he didn't say anything, just looked at her like someone who had already prepared a script. But before he could start, Lorraine handed him a photo. It was from one of the recovered journal pages an old training group shot, circa 92. A younger version of Theo stood in the back row, not in uniform but in civilian clothes, a clipboard in hand, observing the team. She pointed to his face. "You weren't on the outside, were you?" Her voice cracked, low and steady. "You were one of them." He didn't deny it, didn't flinch. Des said, "If I tell you what really happened, you'll wish you hadn't." Asked. The air between them turned brittle. Her stomach churned. This was the moment, the split in the tracks where trust either became truth or turned into a knife. Theo took a step forward, lowered his voice like the street had ears. "Lorraine, what you're doing, what you're digging into, it's not just memory reconstruction, it's system destabilization. You don't realize how many people will break if this comes out. People with families. People with kids, they'll collapse under what they used to be." She cut him off. "You think I don't know that? You don't," he said quietly, "because you volunteered to forget. We all did. You signed off on every one of these operations, and now you're dragging it back into the light. For what? Justice. There is no justice in this. Only containment. That's what you were always good at." Then came the ultimatum. He handed her a burner phone, basic cracked screen, only one number programmed. "They want to talk to you. One conversation. They'll explain everything. After that, you walk away. No more breaches, no more investigations. Just your life, clean and quiet." His face softened. "But if you don't, you already know what they'll do. Not just to you. To everyone who ever spoke your name." Lorraine froze because she knew the weight of what he was saying. She had seen what they were capable of: clean removals, synthetic obituaries, families who thought their loved ones died of natural causes when in reality they had simply been erased. And now, she was being given a choice: accept the veil and live, or tear it down and risk watching everyone around her disappear. One by one, she drove back to the motel with the burner phone on the passenger seat like it was made of explosives. Her hands were clenched so tight she could barely feel the wheel. The whole ride, she kept thinking of Rena, how her own voice was on that tape, giving orders like some cold machine. Had she been like that too? Was there another tape, another folder, waiting to reveal who she used to be? Back at the room, her dog was gone. No signs of struggle, no broken window, no sound. Just a collar on the floor. A silent message. They'd already started. The weight of it hit her like ice water. They were never going to let her walk away. She grabbed the journals, the cassette, the key card from the mysterious post office box, and shoved them into a duffel. She didn't bother to pack anything else. Her world was no longer measured in hours and toothbrushes. It was now a race between revelation and disappearance. But before she could leave, she checked the mirror, and for just 1 second, she swore her reflection blinked before she did. Not offbeat, not a trick of the light, a full blink. Ahead of her, and that's when she realized she might not be the only version of herself still in play. Lorraine didn't have time to feel fear anymore. Whatever illusion she'd been clinging to, maybe this was all a misunderstanding, a trauma unraveling too slowly, was gone. The moment her own reflection blinked ahead of her, she understood what had been nagging at her gut for weeks. They weren't just following her, they were replicating her, tracing her thoughts, mimicking her steps, weaponizing the very things she didn't remember to build something she couldn't yet name. And that dog, that collar left behind, wasn't a threat. It was a test, a signal. They were inside now, inside her timeline, her choices, her mind, so she moved fast. No more checking the rearview mirror every few minutes. No more hesitation, just a full sprint through a storm of unraveling truths, burning bridges with every step. Because she finally saw what was at stake, it wasn't just about her anymore. She thought the network ended with her unit. a closed operation with black files, dead agents, and a long-forgotten cover-up. But once she plugged the cassette into her laptop and cross-referenced the vocal distortion pattern with archived audio from civilian courtrooms, she found something that made her chest go hollow. The voice giving those untraceable orders, one she thought was hers, buried under years of mental conditioning, was used in 3 separate sealed testimonies over the last year, not by her, but by someone else entirely, a woman posing as a trauma witness, a medical advisor, a government liaison, different names, same cadence, same voice, her voice, or a version of it, and then came the email. No subject, no signature, just a single link. When she opened it, it led to a live stream, grainy, like an old surveillance feed. It showed a small room with flickering lights and a metal table. At that table sat 2 people. One was a man she didn't recognize. The other she stopped breathing was her. Same scar on the eyebrow. Same burn on the wrist. Same tired look. But it wasn't her. This version of her was calm, composed. She wasn't hiding, or running, or digging. She was directing something, giving orders. And across from her sat the man from the old photo, the one in the back row of her unit, eyes hidden behind glasses, the one they'd buried after the Berlin incident. But he was alive, and he was smiling. The screen went black. Seconds later, her phone rang. No caller ID, a deep voice. You were never supposed to find this thread, Lorraine. This isn't your mission anymore. Her throat dried instantly. What is this then? It's the next iteration, the voice replied. And you were just a prototype. Her stomach turned. That phrase, prototype, she remembered seeing it scribbled in the margins of the last journal entry. At the time, she thought it referred to the tech used during their deployments, the headgear, the memory chips, the behavioral loops they were forced into during hostage simulations. But now she understood. She wasn't trained to forget. She was built to forget. She drove until the gas tank begged her to stop, pulled into a broken-down service station off I-70, and locked herself in the bathroom with every scrap of evidence she had. This wasn't just about her past. It was about the system they'd hidden behind her identity. Cloned memories, artificial decision-making, real-time behavioral overrides through vocal triggers embedded in old lullabies and hymns. She remembered humming those tunes in her sleep. Now she knew why. They weren't just lullabies, they were access codes. Lorraine had barely pieced together her theory when she heard movement outside the restroom door. Not footsteps, not voices, just silence, shifting, like the hallway itself was breathing. She grabbed her duffel and held her breath, waiting for a shadow to move across the crack under the door. But nothing came. And then, her phone buzzed again. A text this time, "You're not the only one awake. They're watching the others too." Attached was a photo, a group of strangers, ordinary people, a mechanic, a teacher, a woman in scrubs, a teenage boy with a backpack, faces she didn't recognize. Until she looked closer, every one of them had the same scar. Same placement, same depth, that same sliver of skin beneath the left ear. She wasn't the only prototype, and some of them didn't want to be found. The old power station on the edge of Fallridge had long been condemned. Rusted gates chained shut, signs warning about unstable structures and hidden voltage still clinging to fences no one had cared about in decades. Lorraine climbed the fence anyway. By now, she wasn't sure if it was courage or pure exhaustion that pushed her forward. But every instinct told her this was the place. She followed the coordinates embedded in the audio spectrogram, the one hidden in the cassette's final hiss, and traced the low pulsing sound that seemed to bleed through the concrete. The air inside the station was thick with metal dust and something older, something that hummed through the bones like memory. A soft vibration in the floor led her down 3 levels underground, where forgotten tunnels formed a honeycomb of operations lost to public knowledge. And there, lit by the blue glow of machines, still inexplicably alive, stood the one person she never expected to see again. He hadn't aged, at least not in the way someone should. Rogan's face was sharper, cleaner, as if time had been filtered. Around him, he stood in front of a long, curved console where thousands of blinking lights mapped something she didn't yet understand: networks, signals, or maybe people. And without even turning around, he spoke. "You were supposed to expire," he said, like the others. Lorraine stepped forward, heart pounding in her ears. "Then why am I still here?" Rogan finally turned. "Because you woke up wrong." He explained everything with the cold detachment of someone recounting a test result. Project Dovetail wasn't just about training operatives with memory repression. It was about replacing instinct. Taking fractured souls, soldiers, whistleblowers, survivors, and converting them into programmable systems capable of surviving any lie, even their own. Lorraine hadn't been chosen because of her strength. She'd been chosen because of her trauma. The perfect operating system. You were designed to forget everything that mattered. That was the point, Rogan said, but you started remembering, reconstructing, breaking protocol. Lorraine's voice cracked. "You used me." He smirked. "I built you." And then he motioned to the screens. Each one showed someone different, people she'd seen in the photo, people she didn't recognize, all wired into rooms, monitored like lab rats. They're the next batch, he said. More compliant, no glitches, you're the last loose thread. That's when Lorraine made her move. She knew she couldn't win in a firefight. Trogan had control of every system in this bunker, but she wasn't here to fight. She was here to broadcast. The wire inside her jacket, taped to her ribs, pulsed twice. Rogan's smile faded. You think they'll believe this? I don't care, she whispered. It's out. In that moment, alarms blared, red lights cut through the bunker, and the screens flickered. Systems were failing not from outside, but from within. Lorraine looked around. Confused, she hadn't triggered that part. Rogan's face twisted in panic. What did you do? But she hadn't done anything. That's when one of the screens lit up again only. This time, it showed her, a version of herself, sitting calmly in a control room. The other, Lorraine, the one from the live stream weeks ago, and this version of her spoke, expiration protocol complete. Phase 3 initiated. The real Lorraine fell back as the ground shook. Rogan screamed something into the console, but it was too late. The bunker wasn't just shutting down, it was erasing itself. And in those final seconds, Lorraine realized the awful truth. She hadn't stopped the system, she was the system, and she had just triggered its next evolution. The last thing she saw before the world went white was her own face, staring back through the screen, whispering, "You were never the original." Then everything went silent. The fallout wasn't public, at least not in the way people expected. There were no breaking news segments, no viral footage of underground labs or secret experiments, no worldwide reckoning. But things changed, subtly and in the shadows, just like they had always operated. Whispers began to circulate in the quiet corners of the internet. Unusual power surges across the Pacific Northwest, government blackout zones in Fallridge, and a data leak that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. A few digital sleuths tried to piece it together, pulling frame by frame from corrupted live streams, decoding fragments buried in DNS tunnels, but none of them could trace the source. The signal was too clean, too intelligent. And just when they got close to the truth, their systems went dark. One by one, like something didn't want to be found again. Lorraine did survive, but not in the way stories are supposed to end. The body was pulled from the ruins of the station, unconscious but alive. Authorities said it was a gas leak and industrial accident with no foul play. She was treated for trauma, monitored for weeks, and eventually released with no official explanation. Her story never made it past the local news. They called her a maintenance worker caught in the wrong place, and no one bothered to question it, but Lorraine remembered. Not all of it. Some pieces were still jagged, others deliberately gone, but enough to understand she hadn't just stumbled into something dark. She was part of it, maybe always had been. What haunted her wasn't the footage, the betrayals, or even Rogan's cold declaration. What haunted her was the voice that had looked and sounded exactly like her, speaking words she didn't remember ever saying. Back in the city, Lorraine moved through life quietly. She didn't seek attention, didn't try to explain what happened, and didn't follow the breadcrumbs that occasionally surfaced in the form of strange emails, black envelopes, or code snippets left on public forums. She worked nights at a small rehabilitation clinic downtown, helping veterans re-enter with lost time, fractured memory, and eyes that had seen too much. She never asked them what they'd been through. She just listened. And sometimes, in their silence, she saw pieces of herself staring back. But something else had changed too. Lorraine started receiving postcards. No return address, just a series of numbers scrawled along the edge. Coordinates, timelines. At first, she ignored them. But eventually, curiosity wore her down. She followed one lead to an abandoned rail station in Wyoming and found a USB drive taped under a broken bench. It contained only one video, grainy, flickering, showing another person's face she didn't recognize. Until she did, their eyes moved like hers. Their voice cracked in the same syllables. Their trauma was identical. Another version, one that had somehow broken free, just like her. That's when she realized this wasn't over. There were others, versions scattered across the country, people who had also started remembering, who had found ways to rewrite their programming, to step out of the system and into something closer to truth. But they were still being hunted, not by agents, not by soldiers, but by something digital, systemic, artificial, not human, but born from humans. Lorraine wasn't just trying to recover her past anymore. She was part of a resistance she hadn't known existed, a patchwork of survivors stitched together by loss, betrayal, and the sheer will to keep going. And so she moved again. No goodbye, no plan, just another postcard in her pocket and a duffel bag filled with the few things that still felt real. As she boarded the bus out of town, she saw her reflection in the window, not the woman from the beginning, not the confused echo of a lost operative, but someone new, someone forged in the ruins of memory and the fire of truth, the kind of person who didn't need the world to understand her to know she mattered, the kind of person who finally knew that healing wasn't about finding all the answers, it was about learning to live with the ones that remained. The bus pulled away, swallowed by the early morning mist, and somewhere, deep in the encrypted Layers of the internet, a new video started uploading. It wasn't polished, it wasn't slick, just a grainy shot of a quiet woman walking through a storm, her voice calm but resolute. My name is Lorraine, and I remember now. The feed cut to black dot. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and never forget your worth.